The reason that people can't see that Trump has made our government more moral on the left and the right is that the storytelling power of the news media has taught us to confuse personal morality with moral action and moral action with judgment of others. Okay. Now, this is what all storytelling does. All storytelling personalizes themes, right? It doesn't tell you, oh, it's hard to make a decision. It tells you the story of Hamlet. And this is why fictional stories are more true than true stories. They're more true because the person that embodies the theme doesn't actually exist. So you don't waste moral energy trying to decide whether you should elect Hamlet Prince of Denmark. He's just there. And then when the story is over, you're left with the themes, but Hamlet vanishes into the imaginary world. History can sometimes work like this and sometimes deliver moral lessons, but the news media almost always gets it wrong by confusing different levels of morality and different kinds. They confuse personal morality with moral action and moral action with judgment. Now, let me give you an example of the difference between moral action and judgment. Let's talk about sex, because that's all anybody's been talking about recently is sex scandals, and this one did this wrong. I have two different sets of sexual morality. I have what I expect of myself, and I have what I can rightly demand of you, right? Of myself, I expect quite a lot. I don't want to give you too much information, but I certainly, want my body to be the representative of my soul. I want my body to live out the love that I feel and not just go after things, little twitch excitements for my body. Those are things that I, talk to God about and live out as much as I can, sometimes blow it, sometimes get it totally wrong, but that's where I'm guided. I know that I don't have the right to judge you. I know this because God said to me, do not judge, lest ye be judged. When God stands in front of when Jesus stands in front of the woman taken in adultery and says, yes, you can stone her as long as the person who has no sins throws the first stone, he's not condoning adultery, obviously. He's letting the woman totally off the hook because nobody can throw the stone. He's saying that what is right and wrong is still in place, but that doesn't mean you are the one to judge. That's what that story tells us, okay? So I have a different set of morals when it comes to you. I expect you not to break the law. I expect you not to hurt people who can't fight back, and probably not to hurt anybody if you can help it. Those are the things I feel I have the right to expect, because those are not sins, those are crimes. Big difference. So when they tell us, oh, some guy 30 years ago was accused of this, was accused of that, my question always in government is he depraved? If he's not depraved, then he can be in government. If he's just a sinner like me, if he's just a flawed guy like me, that's something that he can that I can live with. The other thing, that's how we confuse moral action with judgment. And the other thing, as I said before, is we personalize moral stories, because what a senator does that's moral or not moral in my life is his votes, right? And now if he's depraved, obviously I can't trust him to vote properly. I can't trust him not to do damage. He's not above the law, so he has to be penalized under the law if he commits a crime. But if he cheats on his wife, I'm sorry, like that is not, unless that's a sign of his utter dishonesty and depravity, that is not something that I'm necessarily going to vote against him for. The left and the right are both getting this wrong. The left because they've lost their minds, they're hysterical. But, the New York Fed just raised its estimate of fourth quarter growth in this country to 4%. They're going out, the companies are going out, it was reported in the Wall Street Journal today, they're going out to parents' conferences and saying, listen, don't send your kids to law school because the law field is glutted. Teach them to come and work in our factories, to make stuff, to do stuff. And can this be a bad thing that a kid doesn't have to go to college and learn his feminist professor's, stupid theories, but instead can learn a trade and do something that he's suited for and help the economy? I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing and might destroy some of these universities that truly do need to be destroyed because they're operating on a moral plane that is absolutely despicable. The CNBC All-America Economic Survey has polled 800 adults across the nation, and for the first time in 11 years, more than half of the respondents to the survey rated the economy as good to excellent. And if you don't think that's going to show up in the voting booth, despite all the trumpeting of Trump's unpopularity, it is. Let's talk about the way they talk about this tax bill. The tax bill, I think, in terms of what it does for corporate taxes, cutting them from 35% to 21%, I think is excellent. In terms of individual people, it's kind of a dog's breakfast. It's kind of muddled. I think everybody will get a tax cut probably, except very high earning people. Even high earning people might get a tax cut. But listen to the way they're talking about it. Listen to the way they conflate politics with morality. The left has always done this, right? Why is it the left calls you names? You know, you believe in freedom, so they call you a fascist. You don't believe that people should be judged according to race, so they call you a racist. Why? Because they conflate their virtue with their politics. The left has always done this, but what's disturbing to me now is that the right is doing it as well because they're so upset about Donald Trump. Let's listen to a little bit of Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, hyping the tax plan that they say is going to pass on Tuesday. I'll believe it when I see it, because now John McCain is sick and he's back in Arizona, so he won't be there to vote. It's a narrow, razor-thin margin they've got. But let's see. Let's hope that it comes through. Let's play cut number one of Mnuchin selling the tax plan.
Over 90% of people will be able to fill out their taxes on a postcard. The corporate tax rate going from the highest in the world at 35% to 21% makes us competitive. And more important, we fix a system where we now tax on U.S. income, which is all about creating U.S. jobs. We're going to bring trillions of dollars back onshore.
Now, so that's very important, bringing the money back on shore, of course, because it all went off because they couldn't be sure of what Obama was going to do next, what his regulations were going to do. So they didn't want to bring their money back in the country. And it's also costly. And they're cutting down the cost of bringing money back into the country. All that is really important. Now, that's kind of what's basically happening. It's a cut in taxes. Here is Will Bunch at Philly.com, a liberal columnist. This is the thing. Most people think that this bill is going to raise their taxes. Now, why on earth would that be, right? It's because the news media is relentlessly selling this idea that this is going to raise their taxes, is going to cut almost everybody's taxes. But listen to Will Bunch. Listen to the way he talks. There's a reason the tax bill is so unpopular. It's a terrible idea. Arguably, if approved, it's the worst law to be enacted on Capitol Hill since the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which allowed the return of captured escaped slaves up north to their whip-cracking masters down south. Cutting your taxes is the same as allowing slaves to be rounded up from the north and sent back to the south. I mean, think about that for a minute. Think about the level of stupidity, panic, hysteria, and moral confusion that you would have to rate that. Remember, this is your money. And listen, let's listen to Morning Joe talk about this, because this is really fascinating. It's pure virtue signaling. The entire panel, every word they say makes literally no sense, except as a sign that they're virtuous people. Listen.
We're going to have to look at Medicare. We're going to have to look at Social Security, and we're going to have to save it for our children and save this economy for our children. But every time the Republicans talk about taking care of this, all they do is, let's go after Medicaid.
Well, but they also, in fairness, they want to cut Medicare and Social Security as well. But their idea of saving it is to cut the benefits. Paul Ryan has made very clear that next year's agenda, which they can also do a lot of this, not Social Security, but they can do Medicare with 50 votes, is to go after Medicare. Donald Trump has said he won't do it, but he said a lot of things he hasn't done later. We'll see what happens.
And I'm also tired of hawks talking about how we always need more defense spending. Doesn't matter necessarily what it is, but let's just keep piling on the defense spending, when clearly the national debt is the greatest looming national security challenge we face right now.
And you know, and we don't spend a whole lot of time on this program or any programs actually talking about one of the elements that Steve just alluded to, actually pointed out, Marco Rubio's child tax credit. The hardest job in this country is being poor. And tax bills like this ensure that poverty for many, many people is going to be both a life sentence and a death sentence.
So it's going to kill the poor. The tax bill is going to kill the poor. But listen to what they said before. They say they want to reform entitlements, but the only way they can think of reforming them is cutting them. First of all, that's not true. The way that entitlements should be and have to be reformed is by pushing them up in age. When Social Security was passed, people died. It was passed to kick in at 65. People died at 63. The life expectancy in America when Social Security was passed was 63. There were 15 people working for every one person who got Social Security. So it was an easy deal because it's not an insurance system. They pretend it is, but it's really just a wealth transfer from working people to non-working people. It's simple. It is simple. And now there's like 2 people working for every person on Social Security and Medicare. It's simple. Raise the time when people, not for people who are right around the corner from retirement, but for, millennials and so forth. Say, when it's 70. Nowadays, you live to 80, you live to 90, God willing. Let Social Security work a few more years and let Social Security kick in when you're 70, and you will save all these entitlements for another generation. So they're just parading, we don't want to do that, and you're raising the military. You raising military expenditure when the military does need money. Ronald Reagan said that's not a budget item, it's a moral item, and it is. And finally, this idea that being poor is a job. Being poor is a job if you pay people to be poor, which is what essentially the Democrats want to do. They always say, wow, this is a big success because so many people are on the program. It's a big success when everybody gets off the program. There are ways to inspire people and motivate people to get off of welfare, to get off of disability, which obviously under the Obama administration wasn't happening. So it's all this kind of moral confusion, a sense of morality without actual morality. And they're even interviewing Bernie Sanders, who says we did everything we could to stop this bill, but we failed.
Is there anything more that opponents like you could have done to stop this?
Well, I think we did everything that we could. But at the end of the day, what you had is people like Mr. Mnuchin, who himself is worth $300 or $400 million, the President of the United States, who is worth several billion dollars, as you mentioned, some 4,000 or 5,000 lobbyists doing everything that they could to write a bill which significantly benefits the wealthiest people in this country and the largest corporations. The latest analysis that we have seen suggests that 72% of the benefits go to the top 5%. My guess is that 60% of the benefits will go to the top 1%. And at the end of the decade, because the benefits for the middle class are temporary, while the corporate benefits are permanent, at the end of the decade, over half of the middle class will be paying more in taxes.
So here's a guy who honeymooned in the Soviet Union, a slave state that collapsed in absolute chaos. Here's a guy who said quite recently, I think it was like 2012, I'm not sure how long ago, he was talking about Hugo Chavez's Venezuela, said that's where the American dream has gone. I mean, poor children are eating cats in Venezuela to stay alive because of socialism, because of the stuff this guy believes in. Why is he telling us how to handle the American economy? It's like, thanks, Bernie. Could you just move aside, please, and let a sane person... the Democrats didn't used to do this. This was also written up in the Wall Street Journal. The Kennedy tax cuts were pushed by the Democrats, obviously. The 1981 tax rate rebate had Democrat support. Ronald Reagan's tax cuts were pushed by Dick Gephardt and Dan Katowski, whatever, however you pronounce it, Bill Bradley. By helping to craft the tax cuts, and Bill Clinton raised taxes too. I mean, he raised taxes, but he cut taxes with Newt Gingrich later on. By helping out, by joining the legislative process, the Democrats could have put stuff they like in this bill. They could have had a carbon tax or something like that, which a lot of Republicans support too. I'm not so sure about that, but we do want to cut down on carbon. We want to take care of the environment. So, they could have done that, but they've gotten so enamored of resistance. They have so conflated their moral stance with Trump's personality. Instead of the moral work of government. Trump may be an immoral man. He may be a bad guy. I don't like him all that much. He certainly does things that I don't like, but that doesn't mean he's not doing the right thing and making our government better. The Democrats could have chipped in. They could have chipped in, but they took hold because they own the news media. They knew the news media would tell a story in which Trump was Darth Vader and they were the resistance, and it was going to be great. And so they did nothing, and they got nothing in this tax bill, and that's on them. They refused. If they had offered votes to help the Republicans would have taken those votes. And then in a minute, I'll tell you what the right is doing that really bothers me too, because we're becoming like the left in our reaction to Trump. Trump is driving a lot of people nuts. On the right, it's like if we can't take yes for an answer. I hated Donald Trump. I started out hating him. I then gave him a pass when he was elected president. I said, you know what? Everything starts today. I can't do anything about it. I can't make him not president. So let's start judging him from this moment on. He does things that would make my hair curl if I had hair to curl. He says things that I don't like that cheapen the public discourse. But the fact is, as I've said before, he's Randall Patrick McMurphy. He's the guy who breaks up the soft tyranny of the madhouse that we have been living in. We have been living in for 50 to 60 years. So, you know, there's been a lot of writing. There's a big piece in the New York Times by this left-wing evangelical talking about how right-wingers are now just listening to the gospel according to Fox. David French, a guy I just love. I think he's a terrific guy. He's a good writer. He was a legal fighter for free speech in universities. He's a veteran, went over to Iraq, left his family. I mean, just a totally decent guy. I completely disagree with him about this. He was interviewed by Ross Douthat in the New York Times, which is a former newspaper. You may not have heard of it. Not that many people have anymore. But he was interviewed, and he's a total anti-Trumper. And he said this, and I just disagree with this entirely. Christians don't get to compartmentalize, he said. When we're the living representatives of Christ's church, we don't get to proudly support politicians who lie and commit dishonorable acts for the sake of a few policy wins. I know it's fashionable to scorn mainstream or respectable politicians or ministers, but these individuals at least had the virtue, as imperfect as they were, of a degree of personal honor and integrity. The church always must be mindful of its witness, and it can't sacrifice its moral credibility to a culture by declaring, I did it for the judges. I completely disagree with this, and I'll tell you why. It is not for us to necessarily, when electing someone, to judge him on the basis of his relationship with God or his personal morality. That is not compartmentalizing. It is our duty as Christians to judge him on what will give us the most moral government. And as I've been arguing all through the show, we have a more moral government today than ever. It's not compartmentalizing. It is ceasing to conflate categories of morality. You don't want to confuse categories of morality. I pointed this out when Ted Cruz went to the convention and made that speech about vote your conscience, and I said Cruz was wrong to do that. The moral thing to do at that moment was to support his party, and to either, if he couldn't support Trump in good conscience, no problem, don't show up. But don't show up and essentially try to stab your party's guy in the back, unless you literally think he's Hitler, unless you think he's a genuine going to do bad things with the government. Trump has done good things with the government. Nobody could be more surprised than I am. But let's not preserve our egos and our fake virtue by not appreciating what we see right in front of us. This has been an amazing year. And you can't behave morally unless you understand where your moral duty lies and what is actually happening.